My name is Erin Whitmore. I am 35, and the police called while I was reviewing a hospital supply contract at work. An officer said a couple had entered my Hocking Hills cabin with a moving crew and claimed they had permission. They were my parents, and they had no permission. My dad had given the family home to my brother as a wedding gift, even though I had paid their mortgage for 5 years. 3 months later, my parents demanded my house. I refused in writing. Then the police called, and before I reached the cabin, my phone showed 42 missed calls. Before I tell you what the officers found inside, tell me where you are watching from and whether your family has ever mistaken generosity for obligation. I want to know who recognizes that feeling. My husband picked me up, and we drove south without answering anyone. The officer told me to come. When we turned onto the cabin road, I saw a patrol car, a truck, and my parents' furniture lined beside the driveway. Then my father stepped forward, holding a key he had claimed was lost. 5 years earlier, my father called me 3 days before the mortgage was due. Douglas Whitmore rarely admitted that he needed help, so when he asked whether I could cover one payment, I took him seriously. His appliance repair company had lost contracts with 2 apartment complexes, and my mother, Melanie Whitmore, had reduced her hours at a medical billing office. He said the shortage was temporary. He promised to repay me after his next commercial account came through. The house in Westerville was where my brother and I had grown up. I could picture the kitchen table where I finished homework, the garage where Dad taught me to change a tire, and the hallway where our heights were marked in pencil. Losing it felt bigger than losing a building, so I transferred the money that afternoon. The next month, Dad was still short. Then another contract was delayed. By the 6th month, he stopped presenting each request as an emergency and started asking whether I could keep helping until business improved. I was earning a stable salary as a hospital procurement manager, and my husband, Evan Cole, worked as a civil engineer. We were comfortable, but we were not wealthy. Still, I agreed because Dad repeatedly said I was protecting the family's future. After the first year, I created an automatic transfer. The payment left my account every month before I could spend it anywhere else. Dad thanked me in private, but in family conversations, the money became invisible. He talked as though the mortgage simply handled itself. The imbalance was not new. When my younger brother, Trevor Whitmore, quit a sales job because he disliked his manager, Dad paid his rent for 4 months. When I wanted a professional certification that could help me qualify for promotion, I paid the tuition myself and studied after work. Trevor received Dad's service van when he started a small delivery business, while I was asked to drive Mom to appointments whenever her schedule changed. Trevor could visit for one Sunday lunch and be praised for remembering his parents. I could cover thousands of dollars in housing costs and still be told I should call more often. I did not resent helping at first. Evan and I had postponed remodeling our outdated kitchen, but the delay seemed manageable. Dad kept telling me that both his children would be treated fairly when the house was eventually sold or inherited. In one email, after I asked whether we should put the arrangement in writing, he replied that I did not need a contract with my own father. He added that the home would be handled fairly between Trevor and me. I saved the message without imagining how important it would become. During those 5 years, I also bought a cabin in Hocking Hills. It was not inherited, gifted, or purchased with family money. I saved overtime pay, annual bonuses, and the extra income from consulting on hospital inventory projects. Evan contributed to furnishings, but the deed and loan were mine because it had been my long-term goal before we married. We used the cabin on quiet weekends and occasionally allowed my parents to stay there when we were not using it. Dad had an emergency key, which seemed harmless then. Trevor's wedding to Natalie Reed was held at a renovated brick venue outside Columbus. I paid for their photographer as my gift because Natalie wanted someone experienced, and Trevor said their budget was already stretched. The reception was warm and polished, and nothing about the evening suggested that I was about to learn how little my 5 years of help meant. Near the end of dinner, Dad stood for a speech. He talked about responsibility, family continuity, and giving young couples a solid beginning. Then he handed Trevor a leather document folder. "This is the deed to the Westerville house," he announced. "Your mother and I are giving it to you and Natalie as our wedding gift." The room erupted in applause. Natalie covered her mouth, but Trevor only smiled and nodded. He was not surprised. That detail struck me harder than the announcement. Dad continued, saying Trevor deserved a strong start because he was building a family. I understood the message beneath his words. My stability had become the reason I deserved less. Because I had paid my own bills and covered theirs, I was considered capable of absorbing another loss. Across the room, my cousin Rebecca Hayes met my eyes. Her expression changed from confusion to concern. Evan leaned close and asked whether I had known. I said no. I did not interrupt the reception or demand an explanation beside the dance floor. I congratulated Trevor and Natalie, collected my coat, and left before the final dance. Dad texted before Evan and I reached home. "Do not make your brother's wedding about money," he wrote. I stared at the message, then checked my banking app. Another mortgage payment was scheduled to leave my account the following morning. The following Monday, I canceled the automatic transfer. The payment had cleared, but there would not be another. I downloaded every bank statement covering the previous 5 years, saved Dad's email promising fair treatment of the house. I did not want anger to make me careless. My first call was to the mortgage lender. The representative confirmed that I was not an authorized borrower and could not receive account details. It clarified something I had avoided. I had paid the debt, yet I had no legal ownership in the property. Dad had never protected my contribution legally. I met with an attorney named Monica Price, who explained that recovering family payments could be difficult without a written agreement. The email might help, but Monica advised me not to send another payment unless everyone signed clear terms. She also told me to preserve every message and avoid emotional threats that could be used against me. 4 days passed in silence. Then Rebecca contacted me and asked whether we could meet privately. At a coffee shop, she placed her phone between us. "I think you need to see what they planned," she said. Rebecca was included in a family group chat. 6 weeks before the wedding, Dad had posted that the deed transfer was complete. He told Rebecca and Trevor that I knew about it and supported the decision. Trevor replied with a thumbs up and asked whether the mortgage would continue being paid. Dad answered that I had covered it for years and would not stop over paperwork. The conversation did not end with the house. Dad wrote that he and Mom would remain there for 90 days after the wedding, then move into my Hocking Hills cabin. He called it my extra property and said I barely used it. Melanie asked whether I had agreed. Dad replied that agreement was unnecessary because I would cooperate after the family reminded me how much they had done for me. Trevor knew. He asked whether the cabin had enough storage for our parents' furniture and suggested renting a moving truck instead of paying a full-service company. Natalie wrote that the transition should happen quickly because she wanted privacy before the holidays. The betrayal was not spontaneous. It had been organized around silence and my bank account. I asked Rebecca why she had not told me earlier. She looked ashamed and said Dad had insisted I was involved in the plan. She began doubting him only after seeing my face at the wedding. Then she found a newer message in which Dad complained that I had canceled the payment and called me ungrateful. I took screenshots, forwarded them to myself, and thanked Rebecca. I did not call Dad. Part of me wanted to hear whether he would tell the truth without being cornered by evidence. He did not. Exactly 3 months after the wedding, Evan and I were invited to a backyard cookout at the Westerville house. The invitation came from Melanie, who wrote as though nothing had happened. Evan thought we should decline, but I wanted to know whether the cabin plan was real or merely something Dad had written before thinking it through. The house already looked different. Natalie had turned my old bedroom into an office with white shelves and a large desk. Another bedroom was being cleared for what she called a future nursery. Trevor walked through the rooms like an owner giving a tour, while Dad carried plates from the grill and acted like a guest. After lunch, Douglas tapped his glass and announced that a moving company would take his and Melanie's belongings to my cabin the following Saturday. He said it casually, as though he were confirming a reservation. "No," I said. The table became silent. Dad frowned. "No what?" "No one is moving into my cabin." He reminded me that Evan and I owned our home and that I also had the cabin, while Trevor had owned nothing before the wedding. Melanie said adult children were supposed to help their parents. Trevor argued that my mortgage payments had supported Mom and Dad, not purchased rights in the Westerville house. Evan asked the question nobody wanted to answer. Why can't they remain in this 4-bedroom house? Trevor looked at Natalie before replying. We were promised privacy after 90 days. I told them their private arrangement did not include my property. Dad said the key proved he had always been welcome. I answered that every past invitation was revoked immediately. That evening, I emailed all 4 of them. I stated that Douglas and Melanie did not have permission to enter, occupy, store items at, or direct movers to my cabin. I sent the same notice by certified mail and requested the emergency key back. 2 days later, Rebecca forwarded one final screenshot. Dad had written to Trevor, "She will surrender once the truck is loaded. She never follows through when family pressure starts." I printed that message and placed it beside the cabin deed. 18 days passed without another message from my father. I changed the cabin's electronic code, removed my parents from the security contact list, and asked Douglas again to return the emergency key. He replied that he had misplaced it years earlier. I knew that was false because he had used it the previous winter, but I did not argue. I scheduled a locksmith for the following month and told the security company that nobody except Evan or me could authorize entry. On Wednesday afternoon, my phone displayed an alarm notification while I was reviewing a vendor contract. The cabin camera showed a rental moving truck backing toward the porch. Douglas stepped out first, followed by Melanie and 3 movers carrying boxes. He entered the code twice, discovered it had changed, then removed a key from his pocket. The deadbolt opened. The storm door did not. Dad pulled it hard, wedged a metal dolly against the frame, and forced enough space for the movers to carry in a dresser. The wood split near the latch. The security dispatcher called before I could reach the camera's speaker. I confirmed that nobody had permission to be there. She sent deputies and advised me not to confront anyone remotely. Less than 10 minutes later, an officer called from the cabin. He asked whether the couple on the property were my parents. I said yes. He asked whether they had permission to enter or move belongings inside. I said no, and explained that I had revoked all access in writing. Douglas could be heard in the background insisting that the cabin was his daughter's extra property. The officer said Dad was holding a key and claiming family permission. I told him the key had been retained after I requested its return, and that I could email proof immediately. From my office computer, I sent the deed, the refusal email, the certified delivery receipt, and Rebecca's screenshot showing that Dad expected me to surrender after the truck was loaded. The officer told me to come directly to the property and not discuss the incident with my family during the drive. Evan left his job site and picked me up. My phone began vibrating before we reached the highway. Douglas called 6 times. Melanie called 4 times. Trevor called, then Natalie, then relatives I had not spoken with in months. Messages appeared between the calls. Your father has nowhere to go. Stop embarrassing your mother. It is only an empty cabin. You can solve this by saying yes. I followed the officer's instruction and answered nobody. By the time we turned onto the cabin road, my screen showed 42 missed calls. The scene looked more deliberate than the camera had revealed. A sofa, 2 bookcases, dining chairs, lamps, and sealed boxes stood beside the driveway. The movers had stopped working. One deputy was photographing the broken frame while another spoke with Douglas near the truck. Melanie sat in the passenger seat crying into a tissue. Dad walked toward me as soon as I got out. "Tell them this is a misunderstanding." "It isn't," I said. Trevor arrived behind us and immediately began recording with his phone. He demanded to know whether I was really willing to have our father arrested over a door. I did not answer him. I told the deputies that I wanted everyone removed, the attempted move documented, and the damaged entrance included in the report. Douglas interrupted, saying no written permission was necessary between parents and children. An officer instructed him to remain beside the truck and stop directing the movers. Dad ignored him and ordered one mover to carry the dresser back outside. The officer repeated the instruction. Dad argued again, stepped toward the porch, and was warned that continued interference would lead to detention. He kept arguing. The officers placed him in the patrol vehicle and issued citations for unauthorized entry and property damage. There was no struggle, but Trevor moved closer with his camera and narrated as though Dad had been seized without explanation. Melanie shouted that I had chosen property over family. The moving company supervisor announced that his crew would not continue and ordered everything reloaded. I gave the officers access to the full security video. I also showed them the message in which Dad admitted he expected me to surrender. One deputy said the written refusal made the situation clear and asked whether I wanted a formal no trespass notice issued to both parents. I said yes. For the first time, I understood that Dad had not mistaken my silence for kindness. He had mistaken it for permanent consent. A locksmith arrived before sunset and replaced the deadbolt, reinforced the damaged frame, and disabled the old key. Trevor remained near the road until the truck pulled away. As he left, he lowered his phone and said, "The whole family is going to see what you did." I looked at the cracked wood beside my front door. Make sure they see all of it. By Sunday morning, Trevor had posted the edited video. His clip began with Douglas beside the patrol car and ended as an officer placed him inside. It removed the moving truck, the damaged frame, the repeated warnings, and every explanation I gave. Trevor's caption said his successful sister had called police on two aging parents who only needed temporary shelter. Dad copied the story into a neighborhood group and a church prayer group. He wrote that he and Melanie had sacrificed for both children, given Trevor a home, and then been abandoned by the daughter they had supported. He described the cabin as empty and never mentioned my written refusal. Within hours, someone from the church created an online fundraiser for housing and legal expenses. The first comments were brutal. People called me selfish, cold, and obsessed with property. Several relatives forwarded the post with messages telling me to fix the situation before it destroyed Dad's reputation. A woman I had met once at a holiday service emailed my hospital address and said employers should know how I treated my parents. Evan wanted me to publish the complete security video immediately. Monica, my attorney, advised a calmer response. She said facts would be more effective if I presented them once, removed private account numbers, and avoided language that looked retaliatory. Rebecca sent me the full family thread that evening. The screenshots showed the deed had been transferred before the wedding, that Trevor knew I had not approved the cabin plan, and that Dad expected me to continue paying the mortgage after he gave the house away. Another message showed Douglas telling Trevor not to worry about my refusal because relatives could pressure me. Natalie had replied that I would calm down once the move was finished. I spent Monday organizing one factual packet. The first section contained 5 years of bank transfers, with account numbers hidden. The second contained Dad's email promising that the Westerville house would be handled fairly between Trevor and me. I included the recorded deed date, my certified refusal, the security still showing the moving truck, photographs of the damaged entrance, and the incident report number. The final pages contained Dad's own messages describing the 90-day plan and his belief that I would surrender after the truck was loaded. I sent the packet to Douglas, Melanie, Trevor, Natalie, Rebecca, the church administrator, and the fundraiser organizer. My note was brief. I asked them to correct any public statement claiming my parents had permission or that they were unexpectedly made homeless. I did not tell anyone to contact my family, demand apologies, or choose sides. The reaction changed within a day. The church administrator removed the fundraiser link and posted that the situation involved a disputed property entry rather than an emergency eviction. The fundraising account was suspended for review, and the organizer later informed donors that contributions would be returned. Several relatives apologized privately. Others said nothing, which told me they had never wanted facts as much as a simple villain. Douglas did not apologize. He accused me of exposing private family finances. Trevor said I had humiliated our parents to protect my image. I reminded him that he had posted the edited video first. He answered that his video showed what happened, while my documents included things nobody needed to know. Those things explain why it happened, I said. 2 weeks later, Natalie called from a number I did not recognize. Her voice was controlled, but the anger beneath it was clear. She had opened mail addressed to Douglas and discovered that the mortgage was still active. She believed the house had been transferred without meaningful debt. Dad had apparently told them the remaining balance was manageable because I would continue making payments. Natalie asked whether I had missed a transfer by accident. I said the automatic payment had been canceled the Monday after the wedding. "You can't just stop," she said. "This affects our house." "It stopped being connected to me when your husband accepted the deed." Trevor took the phone. He demanded that I restart the payments until he and Natalie arranged refinancing. He argued that I had already budgeted for the expense and would lose nothing by continuing a few more months. I asked whether he planned to give me ownership, repayment, or a signed loan agreement. He said family should not need contracts. I almost laughed because the phrase was exactly what Dad had used 5 years earlier. Instead, I told Trevor that accepting the house meant accepting the costs attached to it. He said I was punishing him for receiving a gift. "No," I replied. "I am refusing to finance it." For years, they had treated my payments as background noise, but the silence after those payments stopped became impossible for them to ignore. The first late notice arrived at the Westerville house the following week. Dad blamed me. Trevor blamed Dad. Natalie began asking questions neither of them had wanted answered before the wedding. The financial consequences took longer than the family expected. Nothing collapsed overnight, and nobody lost the house the week after I stopped paying. Instead, each assumption they had made became a separate problem that required money, signatures, and decisions none of them had prepared to handle. Douglas remained connected to the existing mortgage, while Trevor and Natalie held the deed. Their first plan was to refinance the loan into their names and remove Dad from the obligation. A lender reviewed their income, car loans, credit card balances, and wedding expenses. Trevor's delivery business had uneven monthly revenue, and Natalie had recently reduced her event planning hours. They were told that approval would require stronger documentation, a better debt ratio, and money for closing costs. Then, an inspection revealed what Dad had postponed while I was covering the monthly payment. The roof had only a few useful years left. The furnace failed twice during the first cold week of October. A sewer line beneath the front yard had cracked, causing slow drains and an estimate large enough to end several conversations. Property taxes had increased. Insurance premiums were higher than Trevor expected, and routine maintenance had been ignored because everyone assumed ownership itself was the valuable part. Trevor accused Douglas of presenting the property as a debt-free wedding gift. Douglas answered that Trevor should have asked questions before accepting it. Natalie blamed both of them for relying on my money without asking me. Their arguments moved from the family group chat into private messages that Rebecca occasionally summarized, but I asked her to stop sending details unless they concerned me directly. I did not enjoy watching them struggle. I also did not rescue them. By November, Trevor and Natalie listed the house for sale. The first buyer requested a roof credit. The second withdrew after reviewing the sewer estimate. A third made a lower offer that they finally accepted because the mortgage, late fees, utilities, and insurance were continuing. After the loan payoff, repair credits, taxes, commissions, and closing expenses, the amount left was far smaller than the wedding guests had imagined when they applauded Dad's announcement. Trevor and Natalie moved into a two-bedroom rental outside Columbus. Their marriage remained intact, but the house changed how they saw Douglas. Trevor stopped visiting my parents and told relatives that Dad had used the wedding to transfer a problem while expecting me to keep financing it. Douglas responded that Trevor had been happy to accept the gift when he believed it was free. My parents rented a modest one-bedroom apartment near Melanie's workplace. Dad used part of his retirement savings for legal fees, the moving company's cancellation charge, and the repair to my cabin door. Melanie increased her hours at the billing office even though she had planned to retire the next year. Those outcomes were not punishments I requested. They were expenses created by decisions they made without my consent. The prosecutor continued with a misdemeanor case based on the written refusal, security footage, damaged entry, and Dad's conduct after the officers arrived. Melanie was not charged with damaging the door, but the formal no trespass notice remained in effect, and she shared responsibility for costs connected to the failed move. Monica explained that the likely result would involve restitution, court costs, probationary conditions, and an order to stay away from the cabin. Before the hearing, an attorney representing Douglas sent me a demand letter. It claimed my 5 years of mortgage payments were unconditional gifts made for my parents' support. The letter suggested that stopping suddenly had caused financial damage and implied that Dad might seek compensation if I continued discussing the family's finances publicly. Monica's response was 6 pages and entirely factual. She attached Dad's email promising fair treatment of the house, the messages showing his expectation that I would continue paying after the transfer, my refusal regarding the cabin, and the evidence that Douglas had retained a key after claiming it was lost. She stated that he had no ownership interest in my cabin and no basis to demand future mortgage payments. His attorney never sent a second letter. A week before court, Melanie contacted Rebecca and asked her to persuade me to request leniency. Mom said Dad was embarrassed, the family was divided, and enough damage had already been done. Rebecca told her she would not carry messages between us. Then she called me only to disclose the contact, not to pressure me. For once, the cost of their plan was no longer hidden inside my bank account, my schedule, or my willingness to stay quiet for them. I prepared a short statement for the hearing. I removed every sentence that sounded like revenge. I did not ask for jail, public humiliation, or financial ruin. I explained the documented refusal, the damaged entrance, and the reason I needed a permanent boundary. I also made one decision that surprised Evan. I would not ask the court to excuse Douglas simply because he was my father. The courthouse hallway was almost empty when my father finally looked at me. Douglas stood beside his attorney with both hands in his coat pockets. Melanie sat on a bench several feet away, staring at the floor. Trevor and Natalie did not attend. Dad seemed to expect that seeing him there would change my decision. He stepped closer and said there was still time for me to tell the prosecutor the family had resolved everything privately. I asked whether he had returned the copied key before entering my cabin. He did not answer. I asked whether he had believed my written refusal was real. He said families should not turn disagreements into criminal cases. That is not what I asked, I said. When the hearing began, Douglas accepted responsibility for unauthorized entry and property damage. The outcome was serious but not dramatic. He was ordered to pay restitution and court costs, comply with probationary conditions, and remain away from my cabin. The no trespass notice stayed documented. Melanie was prohibited from using, keeping, or arranging access to any key connected to my property. I read my statement without raising my voice. I explained that the case was not about one broken frame or one moving truck. For 5 years, Dad accepted financial help while telling me the family home would be handled fairly. Then he transferred the benefit to Trevor, expected me to keep paying, and treated my separate cabin as another resource he could distribute. When I refused, he entered anyway, because he believed family pressure would erase my answer. I told the court that I was not asking for revenge. I was asking for a boundary that could not be rewritten after another private conversation. Outside the courtroom, Dad said the legal case had destroyed the family. Melanie stood beside him and said Trevor had stopped speaking to them. She asked whether I was satisfied now that the house was sold. Their retirement plans had changed, and everyone was living separately. I told her I was not satisfied by their problems. I was relieved that their problems no longer automatically became mine. Douglas said mistakes had been made on all sides. He apologized for the way things had unfolded, but added that I should recognize how my sudden refusal had frightened them. It was not an apology. It was another attempt to divide responsibility until nobody could identify the person who ignored a clear no. I answered once. Dad chose to give away the Westerville house. Trevor chose to accept it while knowing I was paying. Both parents chose to plan a move into my cabin without permission. Douglas chose to use a retained key after receiving written notice. I did not create those choices by refusing to fund them. Monica handed Dad's attorney a written no-contact notice. Any necessary communication had to go through counsel. I blocked Douglas and Melanie before leaving the building. I blocked Trevor and Natalie as well because they had known about the plan, demanded continued payments, and published an edited accusation when I defended my property. Rebecca remained part of my life, but I set one condition. She could not deliver messages, updates, apologies, holiday invitations, or health news from the others. She agreed. Our relationship survived because she respected the boundary instead of testing it. Over the next month, I updated my emergency contacts, estate documents, security instructions, and insurance records. The cabin received a reinforced door, new cameras, and a lock system that created temporary codes instead of permanent keys. Evan and I also resumed the kitchen renovation we had postponed, while I paid my parents' mortgage. Every invoice reminded me that money could support a life I had chosen rather than maintain an arrangement built on guilt. The Westerville house belonged to another family by spring. Trevor and Natalie remained in their rental. Douglas postponed retirement, and Melanie continued working. None of them received access to my accounts, home, cabin, schedule, or attention. Thanksgiving was the first holiday when I did not wait for an accusation disguised as a request. Evan and I invited close friends to the cabin. We cooked, played cards, and walked the short trail behind the property. Nobody asked me to prove my love by surrendering something. 2 days later, an envelope arrived with Douglas's handwriting on the front. There was no return address, but I knew the shape of every letter in my name. I did not open it. I wrote "Return to Sender" across the envelope and placed it back in the mailbox. Silence finally felt peaceful because it was no longer submission. Financial help without boundaries can become entitlement. Ending that help is not revenge when the support is being used to control the person providing it. I had spent years believing that being dependable meant absorbing every consequence my family avoided. The cabin door taught me otherwise. They called it abandonment because I stopped paying for their choices. I called it the day I stopped abandoning myself.
Thank you for supporting our storytelling. Everything here is fictional and made only for entertainment, education, and dramatic reflection. We hope it reminds you that you should never have to make yourself smaller to keep someone else comfortable. The people meant for your life will not require you to hide your pain, silence your voice, or lower your worth.